Tashdile everyone. So some of us had to go to Sarah for their orientation today, so they will not be able to join us.
Ani tangazo takazon ditor ajine menga dengol ditor ani mashipa che tentemba ta mashipa tentemba do sara ta tentemba la ai ta yo chidangi tentemba la ta ye do wala de chidanganzo midla chi ye do wa ya push ta waina ande zogo gombaina ro pa che waina chi de yo ha ambo koron chi 신앙 저 ye do mo 두제로 ta waina langazo ro pa che na jemba ta ina Geshema Dawa Dolma. 제가 담보스 밑에 약부 통하게 내 속에 이동 어떻게 기점에서라 요거
진소를 좀 말해 계시면
맛이 같은데 전소 진리 전소 담보 맛이 같은데 텐템버 살아 다텐 맛이 같은데 전소 오래 전소래 제가 담보 아니 맛이 같지 아니 텐템버 다 전소 알리디가라 텐데기 아니 아마도 가르치고 가동하는 텐텐바디 시와이나라 가르치고 임바 시와이나 다디 가르치고 있나 아니 가서 파테네지서라 텐소알데 테네서 근데 가르치고 있나 다 공조면서 가르치고 있나 다 가서 남에다는 마유바라 수수직 탑다 시를 가르쳐주 땅와이나야 아니 공조다 바로 받쳐 동에서 얘기치더라 수술 미지댕 미지나 쓰러 받쳐는 질바 먼저 테네서 얘기 디디어라 칼로 야럽 주선 가단더라 소소라 특강이 되도록 같이는 팔아야 한도 파기 미들을 두부로 강의로 되디가라 한도 되치오라.
So then yesterday we were discussing the 7 precepts of causes and fruit, and in that we covered the first 2, which were recognizing all sentient beings as having been your mother, and then the second was knowing their kindness or recognizing their kindness, and now the third one is repaying that kindness. So if you are able to kind of meditate on the first 2, then the third practice kind of naturally follows as a consequence of that. For example, even when we talk about in normal terms, if someone kind of benefits you, or someone is if you are grateful for someone to someone, then it kind of is natural for you to repay that debt of gratitude to that person. So likewise, with acceptance of the first 2 precepts, and by meditating on the first 2 precepts, then the third precept is a natural consequence of the first 2. So just meditating and accepting the first 2 precepts and not engaging in repaying the gratitude or the kindness that we owe to these sentient beings would not be a meaningful practice. Lajur.
수수고이더라. 기시 수수고 로바지 통에 두자로 통에는 예 노트를 파이물로 노트요 말했었나? 라시기 야고 통에 이래요. 그대로 스트림 거였어.
청기디 이동원한테 관리주고.
Attractive the feeling because each your own body finding your body kind of attractive finding very kind we want to have that. But I think it is a summary of the first 3.
Now these are the first 3 precepts, and now the third, the fourth one is, as we kind of talked about yesterday, is looking at these motherly sentient beings as attractive, and herein not just in a physical sense, but like trying to focus on the positive qualities of these motherly sentient beings. This is what it means, I think. And because the kind of exact word, if we translate it into English, it's the closest word is attractive, or pleasing to the mind, right? or pleasing pleasing to the mind. So the object, which is these motherly sentient beings, we should look at these objects, motherly sentient beings, as having qualities which are pleasing to the mind. And in our interactions with these motherly sentient beings, if there ever occurs instances wherein we feel a sense of negative emotions towards them, then know that from the object's side there are no such negative qualities, and that we impose these qualities upon them, and that from their side we should kind of train our mind to look at the positive qualities of these motherly sentient beings.
다 용 따서라 다 용을 샴벨로 라디앙 가서는 파기를 지지나게 샴바단 hinje도 다 됐는데 오로지 다 샴발라디가 파기라지 갈로르지기 얘도 와딱 차비건 아니면 저것들 샴바 로체티즈레 레서다 샴베가 가정나도 자 뭐지 이제 다시 잠도 좀 되는데 다 hinje라고도 갈라나 파기를 신지 동해주네 라 동해들 마스니 대체백인 데발로예 라 hinje라디 간데고는 파기 신에 동해질 나디와 통 나디와들 때네 아니 동해들 아니 소소기 제백인 데봐요 라 hinje기 갈로 마스니 다디다 아니 쩌고도 동해들 습접도 대야게 답시다
당보디 잠바디젤은
hinje로
So then the kind of sensitivity of looking at these motherly sentient beings as attractive has a practical application in the sense that if we are able to kind of focus on the good qualities of these motherly sentient beings, then the practice of love and compassion towards these motherly sentient beings becomes more easier for us. Otherwise, if we just kind of look at the negative qualities, then it becomes really hard for us to practice the next two precepts, which are the precepts of great love and great compassion. And now when we talk about great compassion, in general, when we talk about compassion is that intent which arises on us when we see someone who is suffering, and then you have a wish for that suffering to be alleviated. So this is what we mean by compassion or great compassion.
Okay, then the children hinjela de la carson of Pagishan Dumedilla. None, and they could Dumedilla tender Dumedi Tora, Dumedi and Narala de Dumedi Zoom, the Pagidilla Zoom, and Lord Chevra, Dumedi Susuli, Nonto, Samatana. Ninja Dumim de Padna, they were the Chiba by Samata. That was not Dumia, but the Hako Masin, that Dumedilla, Karchibuina, some symbol of Chikia. There was a Langa and the Tones on the Michikangi, the Oda, Kambala Pachajuro, Tashina Sotona, the Karuchun and Samajua, Namachawana, Ropacho, Chicken to the Chick, Mother Rosida, and there is Lamatu Nije, Mazubi Lochira. That the Chitana. That Mazubachipuche was on the Gomara, and the Digala Hashana, Annie. Tadi maso ina ani karangi kola ropache chapegi thabi marang chihini hasan le dile wa korandel chomni ne ropachi wa lo de rodon to tambo de je ani pagila kangi theo thong kangi de du samechi mo mayin ke kangi de tebu du samechi mo mayin kangi de theo de marang chihini le da hasan.
So then when we talk about this great compassion and our meditation on this great compassion, then first we need to have how do we develop such a compassion? Then first it is very important to kind of accept and meditate on the fact that all sentient beings are equal in the sense that we do not want suffering and we want happiness. If we are able to first kind of meditate on that, then when we see someone suffering, then we are able to kind of relate to that suffering. Without that acceptance of equality, then it is kind of impossible to develop compassion in the first place. Now, for example, you are passing by a road and there is someone on the side of the road who is going through, who is in great distress. And when you see that in us, when we see that suffering, then naturally in us there comes a feeling that when you look at that suffering, that since we are all the same in not suffering, then if that suffering befalls upon me, if I'm in the same situation, then I wouldn't be able to tolerate the suffering. So then you're able to relate to that other person's suffering in that way, and then you have a sense that you couldn't tolerate or bear other people suffering. And this is the quality of great compassion, and this is how we need to meditate on the great compassion. And now, this is all motivations and intent that we meditate on, and a genuine practice would not suffice to just like meditating or developing an intent or a motivation. Now, with that kind of great compassion, it is very important for us, with this feeling that you cannot bear or tolerate the suffering in others, then to develop in yourself an exceptional resolve or intent that you want to help others elevate their suffering. Yes.
Si Quran la dewa ji ja ji chira ta shanju sing ndu ju shanju sem le di khande tongbo ale di khande ha ko ane ndu ji ni tai ma bo chi ro ra ta jang chuk le chidang gi chang wala di ga chi su su gi chi ge dubai na ra ane chi gi marum ba tu ma chang chidang gi chang chuk le la da ben sa je ko ba ro chang chuk le de chi nyu mo bi du ba de si je du ba chang ma ta kwa chi le chang wa chi ra ane chuk le di ga la chi yende ji le bi yende chang ma se 콘도 치바 제를 제와 내지는 장주로 대삼당 저 장주를 되지 당도 장주 되니래다 아니 되니와디 장주 된대기 사제기 고마지 터서는 먼저 신들 제라 레라고요 제자 장주 그 셈래디 저 간대지 고르라나 단단하고 장주 그 셈바 장주 셈발래다 장주 셈래더라 장주 셈발래데 칼라오는 장주 그셈 줄래 요케기 간사들 장주 셈바 와 다 장주 그 셈래데 칼라나 로 치바지 와 어떤데 야고 뒤에 가르려나 라데 되니 로 마인게 신이 된다 된대기 상노탄데 인질라 아니 된대기 셈질라 아니 샹축 셈라 디 디신 고에 패키지 라
So then first I think it is very important to know what do we mean by bodhisattvas and bodhicitta, and in the when we look at the word itself, bodhisattva, then it has two syllable in the Tibetan, 4 syllable in the Tibetan Tibetan translation. Changchup Sempa. Sempa refers to that heroic mind or motivation, and the first two Changchup, and the Chang refers to Changchup, and the first word Chang refers to the fact that you have conquered or subdued both afflictive obscurations as well as cognitive obscurations, and Chup refers to the fact that you have accumulated all the positive qualities that are present in the Buddha. So this is what it means by what we mean by a bodhisattva. And then when we look at if this is what we mean by a bodhisattva, someone who has subdued all afflictive and cognitive obscurations and who have accumulated in them all the positive qualities of the Buddha with a heroic intention, then with a heroic mind, then what do we mean by a bodhicitta? Bodhicitta herein refers to that supreme intention, motivation that exists in such a person, wherein it is supreme and exceptional in the sense that it is always motivated by this wish to elevate the suffering of all sentient beings.
당한서 상제 고방 태에 ndوي라 다 상제 고방으로 터스는 가르로 책이나 이지랑지 유무 벌로 모르면 참아봐 네바차 좋아 근데 참 콘도 치고는 상제다 보라 근데지 터스와이나 상제 고방으로 터에나 되네 신이 된다 두엘레 레하고 차고라 좋아 상제기 되는 고방도만 나도 진도 두엘레 나도 단도 된데기 로제 전부도 제tum만 투에 인자 강이요라 근데 인자 아니다 상제 고마터선 땐데 되와 대응함서 단다 지지 바디로 친이다 내가 친지 되어 니네 남서 주루라 배나가서 지 사와스도 lun고를 되와다 아니 남서 트랜스디 키우도야 남서 동의가 데이터네 담을 주루다 라 나 근데 또 땐데 되와 말에 동의 대화 템포 주와네 땐데 되와 나 상제기 고마로 스타와네 땐데 되와 또 레스트라 That thing the Dewa the Tosuna, and the Ranchi would you done in society Amatama Jedo the Maimba. Right. Did Tom Hajolan, I changed some Janji, the Duella and Lelato. Right. Tawana di Sanji Coma, the Deji and engaged in the Tuni, the Degi Logi, Mantendegi and a Consaji Chago Duna. Tanga Karachu. Tamborani Sanji. Sanjayala and Jukarugulana and Shanti send the Hija the Tata Sama Gora. To do a cheval and not the Shantus and Rajul Chevo at the dinner. The day in Dugala and the Shantu sent Ranjul Chevo to Dugal and Tambu Shantus and Rajul Chevo to Sama Kartan, Sanjay Komata would Gusra. Not Sanjay Komata heading Arachi Buya than Aragi, Chik Pepin the Chibuchi Maimba. Doasm Haji tender and Yagi Levachi to teach Chevala, Narala and Tambo Shantu send Rajul Che, and it the legend Sanjay Komata to a Chigos and Ra. Mia send the Gendel amigo. Chesang other cousin Layamba. Gende Zoshan like me, lady. Na Sanjay Komata Gona, and Can Sanjay Komata Gona, and Misa the Karla Migolana. Gende Zoshan like me, and Tamarani Shantu send Jil Chora. But DJ can't keep that they were Chidrelana, mines. She's Jink Chidrela. The only some kind of Hansai Jachamba.
So then, when we talk about a bodhisattva and the general way we talk about liberation or nirvana, or let's say Buddhahood in this instance, and then when we talk about Buddhahood, all this kind of samsaric, in our samsaric experience, any sort of happiness is not lasting. Something which gives you happiness in one moment changes into suffering. But Buddhahood, when you reach Buddhahood, Buddhahood, then since you have extinguished all the negative afflictions in yourself, then there is no cause for any more suffering to arise in you. And as such, there is a lasting happiness when you achieve Buddhahood. Now, would a bodhisattva be content in abiding in such a lasting happiness that he or she achieves when he attains Buddhahood? No, a bodhisattva is motivated not just to stay or abide in such a lasting happiness or such a bliss in Buddhahood. Even when he reaches Buddhahood himself, his whole aim would be motivated still by the intent or wish to alleviate the suffering of others. And as we kind of discussed before, when we talk about bodhicitta or bodhisattvas, then his whole aim, the whole practice of a bodhisattva is always aimed at others, for the benefit of others, always. So this is the defining feature, defining feature of a bodhisattva or a bodhicitta mind. And now herein, when we talk about so if we want to become a bodhisattva ourselves, or we want to generate this altruistic motivation of bodhicitta in ourselves, then we need to look at the kind of causes and factors that are conducive, that makes it possible to generate such an altruistic intention in ourselves. And then when we look at the causes, then we kind of as we discussed in the 7 precepts, that is important for us to kind of meditate on these, and then and these serves as the causes for us to be able to generate such an altruistic motivation in ourselves, such as great love, great compassion, and so on and so forth. And then now, even when we have that motivation to alleviate the suffering of others and to help others reach liberation, and then when we generate that motivation in ourselves, we first have to achieve liberation ourselves. Without that, we won't be able to help others be free from samsara. So, but even then, as we discussed before, even when a bodhisattva reaches someone who is motivated by this altruistic intention, when he or she reaches Buddhahood or achieves liberation, he or she is not concerned about this lasting happiness or abiding in this bliss. He or she is still motivated to help sentient beings in samsara. That's
that the day in any that tambo ni khoa na lo nganzo dungi ba chako ra khasian khoa dungi de di keleng ma da khoa dungi ma khoa ki la jwa di ta nganzo la china gi dungi sina ma bor jur dungi chaba de sig dungi sirang chi re nganzo chile chebi dungi ra kega na chi dungi la jwa di chang ma la nganzo le yor tambo chida nganzo chogim de chedi ga nganzo le dungi karin yong mi nganzo choge yo ma le ine dungi tende yo sar pu do ma chema ta ba de ngo en chi da 그 동의지 요소라 디대간도 소비민도 땅한도 첨부 차원데 안 디퍼를 간도 다 제니 마시바도 간도 나와 차슈는 동의당에서 하고다 무엇이 나네를 락반나나 감반나나 간도 도건나나 치즈직나네 배 강이들은 좀마도 얘기 동의지도 빙한도 하고라 땅한도 나 참말로 신신도 개비 동의는 간도 라토라도 봐요 말에 이내 간도 그 파마다 간도 보고 뭐뭐들 일단 하고다 게두가 간데 강이들아 라 콘조의 미 마통도 강에 공부하는 로마도에 강에 야라나 강에 마니나 강에 라도 아니 지금 이제 코란스 칼라로 직사고 사고 삼내야 디 사원 남사 포치죠 나추로 되게 강에 라 아니 단도 처럼도 긴고냠도 되는 강에 담르스 따생이다 자도 거리는 뭐 통행기라 근데 이 강에 뭐 보죠 이내 가식 강에 즉 말아 강에 말로 내 강에 오는 요라 제대제 제단 딘데기다 아니 근데 강에 예와이나 아니 간도 코에들라 지키 다당아도 지구에서 나가서 베트코라면서 간서 지구에 잡아요 간장도 지구한다들이 지타타버도 되오라 지도디야 개와 디지모 많이 봐 개와처럼 저들이 저대오 먼저 타투요만 봐 다들 타고나 아니 가서 가지는 상주선라지를 제단 상제 고마터 얘기 땡데 대와 땡데기 동에 앉아냐 마고야라 땡데지 차고 상제 고마터 타고 봐 뭔들 다 땡데기 다 담부터
So then when we talk about this aspiration to help others, then first we need to achieve liberation or be liberated ourselves, or we need to, first it's very important for us to want to seek liberation ourselves. And for that it is very important to recognize that samsara is suffering. If you do not, some people would not be able to easily accept this, that samsara or existence is suffering. First, we need to accept or recognize that samsaric existence is suffering itself. And generally, if we're not able to recognize that, then we would not be able to generate a wish to be free from samsara at all. And then when we talk about this suffering of samsara, then generally we talk about the suffering, three types of suffering. Suffering of change, the pervasive suffering of conditioned existence. But this is not for purposes of this course, we will not discuss these three, but try to look at the general kind of suffering that applies to all of us, which are the suffering of birth, aging, sickness, and death. This, I think, is pervasive to all of us, and we need to recognize that from the moment that we are born, like we are suffering. But at birth, we do not really remember the suffering that we go through. This is something that we don't remember. But if you look at a newborn child, it is apparent that he suffers because he's crying a lot immediately after birth. This, even though we do not remember, is a suffering. And then when we talk about the other sufferings that follows naturally as we grow up, then the kind of physical and sensory suffering that we feel when we go through some sort of illness, a headache, a broken foot, and so forth and so forth and so on. These are all examples that our very existence is marked by suffering. And then old age, now in this group, I don't think like I can kind of in this group we can kind of say it as to all of you. But then if we notice old people, they go through a lot of suffering, and they're physically like everything becomes a little bit more deteriorated. You do not have the same ability, and then they are not able to hear, they're not able to see properly, and these are all sufferings. And not only that, if you have spent some time with like really old people, then not only just the sense faculties, but their whole mental capacity becomes very weak. So these are all marked signs of suffering in our existence. Lasa.
shunzu ende tawa ina kwala dungiro thongde thongde.
So then when you look at samsaric existence or existence itself, do you really, are you able to see that it is marked by suffering? Yes, Liz.
Yes or no?
Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
Wow. 지금 점점 더
For me, it's just,
50-50.
I mean, I understand that it is perceived that way, but maybe I don't fully understand. I don't know, I think maybe the part that I'm missing is that if I look at, I mean, if I understand correctly, I would say that samsara is the circle that we are born as something and we know, so maybe that needs an explanation. That's what I knew that it's like the circle of rebirth. So maybe I need a new explanation about that, I don't know.
Samsara is your afflictive emotion. Samsara is your afflictive emotion.
Your emotion?
Your afflictive emotion.
Okay.
Your disturbing mental factor.
Koala na
And how is that? So it's not connected to rebirth?
It is.
It is.
Okay, so maybe you can explain that a little bit more, the connection between that, between the affliction, emotions and the rebirth, maybe? Maybe that's what I'm missing.
Morang namjuda the koa dumire la the konyoras. The tagi erlan how guges. Yene koala na kandejila muizengurela digoswing mesra. Tini tandakurangilara, nyumong la di koarang rela. Nyumong la chin koala korgiora. Then nyumong di nyumong gichembe koala korla edila and dishes general nandas.
지금 코알이라 하지 가르 코덴 체죠. 그거지라. 지금 자음하시 디케만에는 코아케네 디스칼레 라 코알에 자음하시 켈렌 다나가서 자올에 아니시 안자네 근데 지금 코데오라. 디 자음하시 거를 켈레만 드리지 시엔 살라나 코에요만. 그것도 들으셔라. 코르레 이제 코르데 찔레 코치게라. 다오네 코알라 코고야 진짜 가르치는 코고라. 가지는 어디 레다가 뇽몰래죠. 좋아. 어떻게 다나 어디 잠마시 켈레니다 레지네 켈레니나 레라보요. 지금 되게 잘해. 근데 주코로 레지네다 잠마시 코로 켈만나 this symbol 레야 칼카보라. 아니 퀄리티네 코이나 아니 코 주디 첸카라 가르치는 코고라. 레디가 아니 레다 뇽모. 때는 아주 예 만족이 미친 나로 레망 보시 사고 야가 사고 두어 사고라 세상한테 때 두어들 사와이나 아니 진행선 뭐지게 레 사다나 년선 뭐냐와다 되는 만도네 야자야자 되는 달레 개와다 야고치 사와이나 아니 밀하다 미다 되게 고만테냐 간다 뒤주야 사제 고마터요 말다 간다 간다 콜 코데 좋아 되네지 거라제 되지라 콜 콜.
So then, when we talk about samsaric existence or cyclic existence, then when you look at it, like it looks like a circle wherein we keep like going around the circle. And now this particular concept or samsaric existence or like some cyclic rebirth, it will be tough for someone to accept who does not believe in rebirth, because it is explained through rebirth, samsaric existence. And now it will be tough for someone who does not accept rebirth as a concept, the samsaric or cyclic existence. But if you are able to accept rebirth, then samsara is explained in this way, that we keep taking rebirth in this cyclic existence because of our karma or actions and our negative afflictions. The negative afflictions is a vicious circle, karma and negative afflictions. So because of that, then we keep taking rebirth in samsara. And unless and until we get rid of this negative afflictions, then we do not have the scope to be liberated from samsara. This is one thing. And then when we talk about karma or actions and negative afflictions, then they are both positive karma and negative karma. And then if you engage in some positive action, then the samsaric existence, we talk about 6 realms, 3 lower realms and 3 higher realms. And if you do something positive or accumulate a good karma, then you are liable to take rebirth in one of the higher realms, such as a god, demigods, and human beings as well. And then if you engage in some negative karma, then you accumulate in yourself the cause or the source to be born in the lower realms, such as hell, hungry beings, ghosts, and so on. So this is the manner in which cyclic existence is explained. Yes.
코랑기 디 도와들 백해셔보다. 그래서 과과당을 하고 막 가시는 걸. 도와들 미치기 되고를 춘상만을 뵌 거다. 얘기 렌치글 코랑기 들때 시월도 얘기 삼았다는 시행데 춘상만 그거라. 딘내가 쳐무지래. 다오나 과를 코나 레뉴 코에나 온 레레 간댔어. 대줘라. 봐. 마마 벌도나 내 가르사. 나한테 내 가고 싶다이 메래죠. 봐. 아다 니 미저 간다 지고 있지. 아버지는데 밀레는 치미 두자 개치미 삼삼삼 거는데. 봐. 이미래 치던 동물들한테 좀 세메 도면 안들어 되고래. 이네 가서 휴게 람바네 군다만이 버치는 이 자신 나로 샤와이네. 아주 사모코당 고노 담만을레고라. 디포르런데 샤샤다 코도 가지 지고라. 장아도 셈바도 빈주주전 잠자 가른 잠자 두른 잠자 차도제 잠자 대선제그래. 라. 슈제키 나로 쳐 가지 지는 가서 장같이 가보다. 문내기 다시 타와샤와이나. 라. 때나 그냥 다리 쇼바치 생각할 때 당내 야라 근데 진짜 그거 샤가래다 디퍼를 저러로 야 가지치 수도 가지치는 나로 두서만 준도 하고 있으라 근데 이제 지금 아주 싸대고 디퍼를 알로 두어 지치는 예 지금 melne 저거 생각발라 오늘 삼시기리 지치는 저는 미질은 대sem치 시기리 지치는 걔들에게 맞이네 로디 지금 취겨셔라만 다행도 이러 지치네 다리가 미세 아버지치냐 로빠치니 나랑 지게 곰두냐네 아버지야 그건 대담을 써도 라 안치다 수고는 가면 그냥 디 룸내는 마트네 디 클래스가 들어 디포르는 부드니 한다세 디파사야라 라 디도 고는데요 말 저는 세게 고는데요 말데 양 말이네 세로라 디 디파사고다 네야 예스 고사비기 디파 레슈 전부다요 말라 제가 어떻게 그 딜레를 간데 싸워서 하고 그래요.
So then, this is a very honest and good question, and it touches upon a very technical point of the teachings in Buddhism. And as you ask these questions, I'm sure like a lot of the other people in the group will be helped in gaining a more clearer view of things. And now it's an honest question, and as we kind of talk about cyclic existence, then the kind of natural question that might arise in us is that, okay, how am I accumulating like karma then, bad karma in the sense? Then like in this life, I have never like inflicted any substantial harm to anyone. I have never attacked someone with a knife, or I have never done such a big crime in my life. Then how do I accumulate bad karma? And then if I haven't accumulated any bad karma, then why would I be subjected to this cyclic existence? This might be like a very rough question that arises in our mind. And then if such a question arises, then I want you to kind of look at your mind in the only 24 hours that we have in a day. If we are able to kind of look at our mind, then all the kind of things that arises in our mind, it's impossible to keep track of all the things. Not just 24 hours, just like take the example from the moment you got up until this moment wherein you are in the class. Can you keep track of all the kind of conceptual thoughts, emotions, everything that arises in your mind in this period? For me, I think personally, it's impossible to do that. And if it is so, if that is the case, so then we unintentionally, without being conscious or mindful, we engage in a lot of negative misdeeds. We do not realize when jealousy arises in us. Sometimes we do not realize when like aversion or anger arises in us. We do not know like all these negative emotions. We are not mindful when it arises in us. As well as now, for another example is even though we do not intentionally do this, but out of ignorance, when we walk around, imagine how many, especially in this weather, how many small insects we might have stamped and killed. Even though there is a demerit or like a sin, let's call it, that we commit. not in the Christian original sense of the word, but sin that we commit in doing this. Even when we commit this sin, there is when we do not have the intention, it is still marked by a sense of ignorance. So there is a sin that we commit in this instance too, even though it is not so pronounced as when it is like intentioned. So with this kind of reflection that we are not really mindful of all the things that arises in our mind, and then like consequently then we are also not aware of the kind of the way it manifests in our behavior, then there are a lot of places wherein we unintentionally commit negative misdeeds. That's
Then Narado Pesha, Tanashuba Nayalani, Nalshulo, Mazamudozora. Tisam Bushdo, the Papa Tu is the
snail.
Mundi, Thomas Geshadera, the girl Taklan is this. And the Sing the Roa. They did that call Papa to put in a Sib Hakuda. They make change in the Mamudora, Konzakamba Jagger, Lapa Jagger, Bid Siger, Kanakanichira. Millen, the Shimbala Nuchi, made some water on the Nuchi. And then the colors and it says, and the current that until you ching the Kanye, the butter side of the Mutin ditch, the lady can have a lady to just some mess, some really. That is right.
So this is to say that when this thought arises in you that I am not accumulating any bad karma, then we are not really mindful of our own actions, and so you cannot like categorically or conclusively say that I have accumulated no bad karma. For example, personally, like when I'm sweeping the corridor in my room every day, these days there are a lot of snails that kind of come about in this weather. And then this morning, Tarisho Bara, I like without knowing stamped on one of the snails. So this is the manner in which we accumulate, not me, accumulate bad karma without knowing, without intending it too.
I thought that if there's no intention, there's no bad karma.
There is.
Koi kulung mena ni karma lesa yo marela ne tindeji samno courses.
Could be so
So when I think into Shito, they have like a little placard saying like, if you like see anyone like step on it, there's like a little figure and it goes like this, it's like bad. And if you're like, oops, you know, I didn't notice, it's like, okay. Okay, it's not bad.
Still, you committed that you already took the life.
You're just walking from A to B. Maybe you're walking to help somebody, you know.
Yeah, but every action has
repercussion.
yes.
Can I Roba Chagada? Roba Chagada, do
Ill-intended.
Yeah, for you to accomplish that benefit to others, it has that positive consequence, or you gain the good karma. But for the fact that you stamped on that insect, then of course for that you have the negative consequence too.
It is not a full karmic imprint, but it is non-volitional but accomplished.
Yes.
You are volitional and accomplished, non-volitional and non-volitional and accomplished, non-volitional and non-accomplished, and volitional and non-accomplished. You have those four distinctions.
I mean, the expression of this word is volitional.
Well, I mean,
Out of your own will, knowingly,
knowingly doing, not knowingly doing, knowingly not doing, and knowingly doing.
Usually even the Buddha or Jivamukti, you know,
So it's very simple to
you know, they
understand.
live life honestly with no ill intent, but by mistake they will sit or step on a bug. Like you can't go through life without.
좀 참말로 되어배 모드라. 혼자로 참말로 되어도. 되어디 말랭글랭이 디 만디히지저라. 희지는 되게 투디. 제가 다나 아주 부르 세버데 꾸누요 말에 꾸누면은 디바요 말로 팅다. 라. 먼저래 내가 디바 사마데 키란저게 되어디 말랭글랭이 렌 마시샤나 페지디 되어디 알레게 말라. 담보디라더라.
So then I see a lot of hands raised, and I think there are a lot of questions regarding this. So before we take the questions, if I address this this kind of question that arises when you say that if there is no intention, then there is no bad karma. then if I'm able to address this, then I think the questions will be kind of answered naturally. That's
le sawalara chesanika chambala do ra ane chela masabala ta mambujo ta dinga tashi taw da tingi mudu kanji manji ku kashi kyona se yamarda shala nga ji se tongila na dibosa ra chungos so toyo marde kunu gone marumba chesara dibosa go chigde ya chigi asegi samre phagela sere di dileli lopche kos kunu sambana segi sera dichiche ka시게 양 세비 꾸루요 말에 꾸루 미비가냐 말이비 원게 세샤고레 딜레 디바 여다 이네야 이 세게 인 삼베 세비 세바다 안타가지 꾸루 미비고는 세바니 디바 체슈니 와 담보디 하고 하시나
디시 저건 식송난다디 방보디
데타페나 저기 순제로지라 순제로지 소 세바라 근데 진부로 가서라 세디 가시 담보는 게 세샤고다디 베 조도 바세샤고서나 कोई लेगा दी से को सामरे से निजा छानु रा 제 रे से पुनु से को साम रा तने ले निजा साव काशेगे दा से भी कुनु यो माने माथोन से शरा से को सो छोरे सो दे को नागे ना खरे सम छेसारा इने ये से को साम कुनु यो माने इने तेले देबते छु रा ता काशी से यो मारे इने या कुनु गलंगे से को सरे ठेंदे ना So
then when we talk about accumulating karma, or in this sense accumulating bad karma, then in the text it's kind of it is explained in great detail by kind of citing all the different types of bad karma that we accumulate regarding the same situation. And what changes is in this manner. For example, in the first instance, the person has both the motivation and he actually carries out that action. Let's say an insect. The person says, okay, this insect, it brings about a lot of like unwanted illness to me. And now you are motivated to kill this insect and then you actually kill it. So these meets both the conditions. You have the motivation and you actually carried out the act itself, and this is the way you accumulate bad karma. In the second instance, then there's no motivation as such, but you kind of carry out the act itself, that you unintentionally do it. But since you carried out the act itself, you have accumulated bad karma. And the third is, you have no motivation and you do not actually carry out the act itself. But in your mind, you kind of think about, ale sumba di semnangla di kulung dukjara. The third is not actually carrying out the act itself, but then being motivated by these harmful thoughts towards that insect. So even then, you accumulate bad karma. So what is the difference in all these three instances? There is a degree of bad karma that you accumulate, depending on these these conditions being met.
라파 신디 코 시추추다 남자 가지 파 라파 신디 파샤나나 시르이더라 다디 가드로라와나 코노도 야버르데 코소도 토우더라 딩가라게 가드로 샤몬 데스칼레 카드 부친주도 에춘주 라 추나로라 니키데나 딜랑아도디 코기 쇼파로다 라파는 자디 아니 슬레토 코니 카가치 디퍼시도 인로리다 다다서 가드로라와나
So then personally, it kind of personally in this weather, like we notice a lot of insects that come out in this season, in the summer, and when they come out, like some of them are in places where they do not really. Some are, when we see them on, like, let's say in the middle of a path where they are liable to be stomped on. So when you want to like put them in a place where they are safe, personally for me, sometimes these insects are so delicate, even though like my motivation is to kind of help them, that when I go and like try to put them in, in a safe space, just by committing, just by doing that, that insect dies or wings get clipped. So in that instance, it is very tough. And for me personally, these are hard to explain, what kind of relation between karma and that act would entail. And I think even though I think that by the fact that even though my intention was pure, the fact that that insect's wings get clipped or he dies because of its own delicate nature, then I think now this kind of relation is very tough to explain.
이네 지난주 가실래 저도네 하고 오더라. 저예래도 이네 저디 제일 들으치 있으라. 다나한조 단다 찌찌찌도 얘기 다나한조 상추신 거르시라. 딜레다 히아버지도 빼야 빼다 제바 샤고스라. 준디 시버체 디질랑도 디 지간 제바디 테스데 히잖아. 야 돈이 콜르다. 지난 지간 쇼가 제마도 요마도 용수도 상주 빼무시야 보더라. 디디 가라이데 히칸토도 마찬가지로 맞자고스. 디네 하마나도 디질 하마이나니 저트니 저라. 뭔디 라지더라. 야 가시는 점이스.
I acknowledge that there are a lot of hands raised and there were questions, but I want you to keep them questions to yourself for the time being. And I feel like now we need to kind of address and go on with the root text itself. We need to cover the 8th verse, and I find it very important to kind of finish our discussion on the root text itself, because even though it is a short text, but it is a all-encompassing one, and it talks about all the kind of necessary techniques and wisdom that we need to develop in ourselves to be a genuine practitioner. Lassa.
당당한도 mambuji 도디디가라 당한도 상추 생단지가 상제 고만도 mam보시라와 다든데 니가도 직 타르발라야다 동네들 타고 둘라리 다 가시기다 과라 동네 요마상 마세다 동네 하고다 동네 옆에는 가서 동네지 공부하는 상스 따와있는 동네들 빼 힘을 스스로 매바있는 가서 통보다 그라 다 제가 나지기 동네도 또 봐이 바체 다디 많이 걔게 가서 실로로 따온데가 직 당한도 미도지라는 제가 나지기 동네 다 가실래한테도 고지기 동네 그라 먼저 밑장도 많이 심지 심발래 따다 빠주다 도들 가서 심지도 가서 동에다 치네 동에도 아니제라 가실래 내신 띠무고 동에 마시베기 강에 동에 다다 뭐 동에다 뭐요 안에 가서 근데 바자쳐서 따나네 지치 출로 제비기 아니 지금 밀었어요 근데 동에 사용 제비 동에 와 가시는 직게 투자도 답이 동에 다 가시 있는 직선 다기던 데서 시라도 저기다 다 도서와 근데 동에 뭐 뭐죠 라 소설에 매바이나 좀 하기 통하다 군들로 통하다는 간소에 동에 용어다 관 동에 텐데도 담보디 켈레모다 다들 동에 지켜대 당하는 사람 동에 라시 제레시 뱉는데 타면 가서 사람 동에 나로 되샤스 라 다들 디 이마이나 아니 가서 나 동에 나올래 이바이니 얘기 간데스 군들로 로바죠 소소에 동에 냥데 거래 예 로바치 깔카브로 다들 얘기 빼지 샤와이나 빼가 저도 빼지 야고도 그러선더라 담보 온데라신.
So then, as we talked about bodhisattva and nirvana or Buddhahood, then we also talked about how samsaric existence work and how samsaric existence is marked by suffering, and that in recognizing this marked suffering of samsaric existence, we need to develop in ourselves a wish to be liberated. And in our pursuit of liberation, it is very important for us to know first and recognize that samsara is indeed marked by suffering. And most of you kind of were able to acknowledge and recognize that this existence is indeed marked by suffering. And when we look at the kind of, in our discussion, we talked about the suffering in our existence as a human being, that our existence is marked by the sufferings of birth or aging, sickness and death. And this is regarding ourselves. And we are also liable to think that, in this moment and generally I do not really have any suffering. Then samsara is not marked by, or existence is not marked by suffering or defined by suffering. But when such a thought arises in us, it is important to kind of look from a broader perspective and look at the animals. Even though when we look at the animals, then we see a different sort of suffering that wherein they have no real free will. They are coerced and their whole will are submitted to someone else. and they cannot really do anything of their own will. And then there are some suffering which are marked by a strong sense of ignorance, and then there are some suffering that is brought about by this calamitous nature of the elements. And then there are some suffering that is brought about by that very thing which are supposed to make our life easy, technology, as is evident in the crashes we witnessed between the train crash we witnessed recently. So if we're able to kind of look at these from a broader perspective, then we do realize that even though in this instance we are not suffering, existence as a whole is defined and marked by suffering. And so this is very important to kind of meditate and recognize that samsaric existence is marked and defined by suffering. Nasa.
당이 빼지 샤와이나라 당도 동이 바지 소소도다 당도 띠면 당도 빼지 그 빼지라 당 통통해 무슨 통신 바지라 진지 간다더라 다 먼저 그때 때문에 도 진지 칼로 빠르게 시위도 하셔라 순례다 만도 희지우도 삼도 콘동원이 파게 되니도 가지냥 라 코란즈기 다 세줘라 로치장을 가지는 뒤삼아디 나로 쭉샤샤 라 콘도 조고선을 도서요 말에 칼라든 신부사고선 미 가르테 뒤만도 라이만 라 안들레는 때 라고도 파르스 참참 도고도 살집을 도고도 칼라 신부사고 돌로야 다 가든 지요라 코레요 마다 코디다 쭉샤샤라 가시기도 이제 지우로다 즉 배바로 다든지 샤서도 사실은 마음으로 쓰도 콘디나 파자제 되더라 이제 도서요 말 세상도 줄다도 저 강이다 아주 처음 말 아주 나란 사람 많이 되미 아버지께 소설을 많이 하는 강이 하고입니다 그라 어디다 온디래 되더라 들 강이 가지더라 이제.
So a particular example that kind of illustrates this point would be when we go to a zoo. Even though for us as visitors it is a sort of a leisure activity, something that we enjoy, but the kind of animals that we visit, that we see in the zoo, for them it is suffering actually, because they cannot eat what they want. They only get to eat what they are fed, and they cannot move about freely. Their whole movement is restricted for our leisure, for the sake of our leisure. So even though for you something is an enjoyable experience and there is no real suffering in it for you, but for that very object which we are enjoying, it is marked by suffering.
이빼야시 그래하고는 게 뭔가 록다운 거 무슨 거든 영서. 먼저 다와지 가시지라. 너 다와지 달러진도 있는데라. 혼자기 책한자 찍어라. 먼저 바로도 다와지도 어디 대도하지 나라 칼라라. 바로도 대토무도 같이 짜다가 총로도 다 TV 나오다 같이 빌리시 동거야 되는데 자기도 같이 셈발로 자기 지기도 오셔야 되는데 오셔도 제도 먼저 칼로다. 강에 동이라. 제가 아주 칼로 동이지예요 말해서는 담보도 좀 하고 그래. 동이 가도 그 동이를 타고 해야 동이 걸으면서는 담보 알레 동이 못해요라. 근데지체 다 배드샤샤인더라. 배드 가르라나 그냥 아주 단나 안되게 동이가 시지요 이나 참마 동이가 시지는 로바시 통만 봤어라. 빼나 가르라나 넌 나봐요. 식사진 나봐들이 빼 나봐 첨부지는 아주 파게 게도고나. 먼저 상하만 나봐달라는 루치질 로바시 통만 라 예코 제가는 나만 주로 셴바리 전에 셴바리만 주 참아만 주로다 되나시 가서 참았다 콜라 이디가 로바 춘주춘주디 지도고데 콜라에 대기로 베드네 데와테 얘기 데기 가족이 칼로 로바 지도고 제가 데데 인상가 오늘 그 산제 고바타서는 얘기 아니 칼로 데데 데와테 얘기 데기 데와지 터서나 아니 얘기 로바 지도고라 되나시 얘기 빼나 나딘 당바들이 남동들이 제니 나 간에 태이나 아니 이게 있으면 사마 로봇이 돌아 야텐 돌아 가서는 가 데서 템보라 이게 로봇이 돌아 나 비난주 되네 갈래 가버라 어찌기 옆에 내려오실라셔더라.
So then and not only that, these animals, they spend their whole lives in that restricted environment wherein they don't have any freedom at all. And now if we are not able to kind of recognize that as suffering, then kind of think about it in this manner. When we were in lockdown, then we were in lockdown only for like a matter of few months, at a stretch of few months only. And in those moments when we were in lockdown, then because there were restrictions imposed on our movement and so on, then how suffocated did we feel? And this was only for a few months. And these animals in the zoo, they spend their whole lives in such a restricted environment. So you cannot say that just because you do not see suffering in yourself, that samsaric existence is not marked by suffering. And this is an example to illustrate the point that samsara is indeed marked by suffering. And now another kind of point we need to discuss is this liberation. Why must a bodhisattva aspire to achieve liberation for him or herself first? Now the kind of example used to explain this is in this manner. Let's say that a group of people are stuck in mud or in a quicksand, or let's say in the mud, and then if all of us are stuck in the mud and nobody tries to get out of the mud, then even when still stuck in the mud, if we try to help each other get out of the mud, it is impossible to do it. So likewise, if one person is able to kind of get out of the mud, then there is more opportunity for the others to kind of get out of the mud. So likewise, with that wish to help sentient beings achieve liberation and to be in a place of lasting happiness, then it is important for a bodhisattva to achieve liberation, him or herself first. Only then you have the kind of opportunity to help others gain liberation too.
Tadiri tangazu ki dunia da mambo shedera kana sala dunia mambo she dunia nya chue tenda maresra tamu anzu nosungora ra ngarazu ki chidang lega jin lega notu ding nosuna di lega notu anja chingmara te nashi ngazu ki ten de dewaji go na ani tam dunia le khande dura tunsa mo ote yabu chena ani ngazu ya dunia chi bu mai gawa goye ya mambo ngazu misila ra tadang azu tenjo ki milit thawe ngada chawang hama le yako ji sai balden tadang azu milit thawe ra milit thawe ani chhe sa gi khoyu ji le che re chhe thu re khada mi da ambo chama chayo re mune or de ngazu ya pe gawa gong go ya dra ani meni de dil da ngazu khande chi bu do ra ani chi su ge ma je re ma to je mo to ni bang an le yo ra chi thu gur tende ji ngazu ta da cha chen cha de tadang mune ta pusun so ba cha de ya di ya gawa gong go ya dra.
So then, as we talk a lot about suffering, then this is not to burden you with a sense of guilt or burden you with a sense of suffering. This is because we need to first recognize suffering as suffering. If we were not able to recognize suffering as suffering, then we kind of we will not be able to see happiness for happiness too. For example, if you do not recognize a mistake as mistake, then you are liable to keep repeating that mistake. So likewise, it is very important to recognize suffering for suffering and know that samsaric existence is marked by suffering. Now, this is not to say that there is no joy in samsara. There are avenues wherein we need to take joy and appreciate. For example, the fact that you are born as a human being. You need to be able to take joy in that fact that because of all the good karma that you have accumulated in your previous births, then you have now taken birth in this good human form or human vessel, which is accorded the 8 freedoms and 8 favorable conditions, wherein all of your sense faculties are intact. You are born in an environment where the Dharma has flourished. And you have the facilities and conditions wherein you can actually practice the Dharma. So we need to take joy in these facts too.
온디도 두개 마트나 가지고 하고입니다. 수지부인바 초기입니다. 라. 배나 가서 로그다운 그 하고서 강의지 트 안딜라타나 배지우다. 니만 가서 지우요 하고입니다. 초도고만 가서 제가 샘발에 초야 돼 배케쳐버리다. 라. 근데도
So but it is still very important to recognize or know suffering as suffering. Otherwise, we will not know what happiness really means. And for example, there is a saying in Tibetan that if someone if someone has only tasted sour things in his life, then it is impossible for him to know that there are sweet things in life. Only when you have tasted sweet things, then you know that not all things are marked by are sour.
네. 티치라 단ang zo lo dong ko lai chidang yel jibu yu di chum zla sara cheza ani nga zo jibu yin bo choya de ke chmara ti cheda ta chira dang bo le di la ngal chi du he ga he sangwar dera tanda samna ta du he shimba ta sam ta na kana du he te siya ro dum dera samna ta ngol jo du de.
So then from the start of the course, did you have a feeling that, oh, I have a lot of baggage, or I have a lot of suffering, I have a lot of suffering or problems for myself? And now, as we are at the end of the course, with all this kind of discussion that we had, are you able to kind of look upon the suffering that others go through and then feel a sense that, okay, my suffering is not so bad? Were you able to get a sense like that?
Yes?
Yes? No? Chungulus.
Munele di nga zo ta kan go ta tempa share mara. Mune wor nga sa na dane so so dunye di pe chinjura me chi ge dunye re ma shi shimba dunye ta de nga zo dunye mi da. Ra. Ine namdi so chi po sam dane na ta nga dunye shimbu chibi dule so so ma chu an cha gi cha ne ba cha sembal na en le da. Ti a di chinjura la na. Ti chi ra.
So yeah, this is not just to pass the time, and I'm not joking, but this is a very, we need to adopt such an attitude. Because when we really think about it, the kind of small problems and sufferings that pertains only to an individual compared to all this suffering that other sentient beings go through is very small and minimal.